Hey, how's it going? My name is Mark, and thanks for watching the channel. And I want to thank everyone for watching. What I want to do right quick is I want to talk about split consoles versus inline consoles. In case you're not familiar with the two, split consoles were basically you had to split the board in half. So many channels were designed only for the recording side, and the other channels were designed to listen to what you basically recorded, and those would be the channels that you would use to mix. So if you had 16 channels, like for this one there's 24 channels here, maybe 1 through 12 would be the recording side, 13 through 24 would be the mixing side. Well, this is the reason why certain consoles would be split, where they would have 24 channels of recording and maybe another 32 channels for monitoring. And also some of those channels would use for maybe reverb returns or whatever the case may be. Inline consoles, basically the channel's doing double duty. The channel, as an inline channel, you would have all your mic inputs on all the channels, and then after that you would go to line, and then you would listen to what you just recorded. And the purpose of these consoles back in the days, and I'm using my Behringer Eurodesk model MX8000 because it's an actual recording console. I know a lot of people always love they love for me to talk about the Allen and Heath because of the name Allen and Heath. It's one of those names. It's one of those names like any other, name up there, as far as consoles on the upper level. But this Behringer console was actually designed for recording. It is an inline console. So to not make it very long, because I'm not going to talk about the channels, because the channels are pretty much relatively the same. You're going to have your gain, high pass filter, your EQ, your fader, then your auxiliary sends. But on this console, what makes this a reason why this is a recording console, because it has a second, it's a mix B. It's a mix B, which is basically designed to listen to the mix B side of what's being recorded. Okay, so that's what it's designed to do. So you can listen to. So some people might ask the question, why would you want to use a mixing console when I can just use my audio interface and the DAW? Well, the answer is very simple. You're not going to hear anything in the DAW through the audio interface until you actually open up the DAW. And then a lot of times you have to set the input output to what we call the IO. And then you have to set up the monitoring to hear what's being recorded into the DAW. On a console, I don't have any DAW open up. It's just you can see right here, it's just my screen. It's just my screen. But I can go ahead, turn on, for example, my keyboard is patched into channel 17A here. So you can hear. So right now, as long as I have the studio volume up, I can listen to the studio monitors. So I got the studio, as long as I turn the studio room volume level up, I can hear those channels. The purpose of that is, for example, let's say you got to remember back in the day, before we had DAWs and virtual instruments and being able to do everything and all these incredible things we can do with software and technology and our MIDI controllers and all that, the only way music was made back in the day was actually bands. So bands is the only way you would get music before synthesizers and became really big in the 80s, especially with MIDI in the 90s, and now we have MIDI and audio and everything in the software. The only way you did this in the 60s and 70s was to actually record a band. So consoles were designed for you to monitor what the band was doing as you about to get ready to record them. So I could sit there and I could put 24 channels. What would happen is I would have, for example, drums, all my drums, kick drum, kick, snare, toms, hot crashes, overheads, maybe room mics or whatever. Then I have bass, guitar, keys, whatever case, vocals, background vocals, congos, horns, or whatever on all these channels. And I would get all my levels. So what I would do is I would set up all my gain level because all those would be going through preamps. Most of that stuff will be mic'd. You have a mic on the drums, mic on the guitar cabinet, mic for vocals, maybe a mic for some horns, maybe a mic for some congas. Sometimes you might run a direct input for a bass DI or something like that, bass direct input, something like that. Other than that, everything else was recorded. So I can monitor, for example, these keys. I can monitor the keys. So now the keys, I can listen. So, like, you hear this? That would all be coming from the live room because everyone would be patched into the mic tie line from the live room. And it's all coming through the patch bay, which is now being routed into the console for me to monitor. So I can hear the drummers. I hear everybody in the live room. I can hear them. So that would give me a chance to get everyone's level set. I would get their level set. If need be, I might need to insert some compressors, gates, some outboard gear, some compressors, whatever the case may be. I might need to insert some of that gear on certain channels for certain instruments. I might need to put a compressor on some vocals. I might need to put a compressor on drums or whatever the case. Whatever compressors. I might need to use certain that was going to be my chain to record that stuff as I'm recording it. So now I can monitor, and the thing is, everything's in real time. There's zero latency. Your latency is basically the buffer speed, how fast your computer can process sound. And that's why a lot of times you have to set your buffer down to like maybe 512 or 128 or 256 or whatever. And then a lot of times you up the number when you're actually mixing, but you down the number when you're recording, because the audio interface has to be able to process enough data for the CPU of your Mac or PC to keep up with all that data being recorded into the interface. Back in the day, there was no interfaces with computers and trying to make sure all that's right. Everything went directly to the tape. So tape had zero latency. Monitor through the console had zero latency. So when it went to the tape, the minute you hit record, it's recording directly from the console into the tape machine. Very simple. That's not the case nowadays. So now that was for the purpose of recording a band. That's why you had, and the standard at the time was 24 tracks, 24 channels. That's why, and of course now, sometimes most tape machines would have to change their head stack to go from 8, 16, or even 24 tracks on the tape machine. And they would record on 1 inch or even 2 inch tape to capture that. And then then later on they became hard disk tape machines, ADATs, Tascams, and this hard disk recording before it became interfaces and hard recording to your hard drive on your computer. Before that, it was ADATs and Tascams or hard disk recorders or Atari systems like the Atari Radar. It was recording systems like that, and before that was just strictly tape machines. Studars, Ataris, Tascam 2-inch tape machines, Sony tape machines. That was how you record it. And then from the tape, so once you got everything on the tape, everything that was being recorded will be plugged into the mic inputs or line inputs on each channel. Mic inputs or line inputs, and it would go through the preamps of that console. It would go through the preamps of the console, and that's how you record it. Or what you could do is you could route, instead of using the preamp on the console, you can use an external preamp. Like, for example, this Focusrite preamp. You can use an external preamp. Then you would run it through a line or whatever the case may be, and that will record to the tape machine. And you would set up your chain that way, compressors, whatever, delays, whatever you need, compressors, LA2As, 1176s, whatever compressor you're using and recording to. Now, because we use DAWs, and that whatever the case may be, everything's just going direct from the console into an interface, such as this interface I have here. So this console have direct outs on each channel to record directly to a tape machine. Most of the time it will record, or this console would also have 24, which is right here, 24 outputs from the bus. So you can record from direct from the channels or the buses. So what you can do on each channel, that's where you would set your routing. On a lot of the consoles, the routing switches are up here, and they would set up the bus routing. Sometimes it would be to some actual bus routes. Well, a lot of times those consoles would use other channels, and that would become the bus channel. A channel, like another channel, for example, like here's channels 23 and 24. Sometimes you can hit 23 and 24 on the console, and it would route from the channel to 23 and 24 and let that become a bus channel. And that would then go out to, and you'll see that on SSLs. You'll see that on knees and consoles like that. A lot of them didn't, some of these didn't have bus, and then some consoles actually do have bus faders. Like this one has actually bus faders. So I would hit 1 and 2. So now I can route, for example, my drums, if my drums are channels 1 through 8 here, I can route all my channels through 1 through 8. I can have a compressor on 1, 2, maybe 5 and 6. Then I can have a compressor on the overall bus, where the case may be, and so forth. And I can say maybe 9 through 16 would be instruments like bass, guitar, keys. And then maybe 17 through 24 would be like vocals. And I might have that routed through buses 5 and 6. And then all those would then be coming out of the outputs of the buses into the tape machine. If you really want to get, that case. Now, after all the channels will be coming out into the console to record, what would happen next is the outputs of the tape machine would then return back into the console. That's why we call it an inline console. Here, since this is my audio interface, all the outputs from my interface over there is coming into, returning back into the console here. Here, 1, 2, since I only have 8 outputs on my interface, I'll have 8 inputs into the channel. So those channels, so now whatever I record, I can now turn the console from a recording console into a mixing console. And I can still use the EQ, auxiliary sends, inserts, and now I'm ready to start mixing. So now I'm going to start mixing. I'm going to start mixing on the console. And once I start mixing on the console, as an example, so once I start mixing on the console and I got my EQs, I got stuff sent to auxiliaries for reverbs, I got compressors and all that stuff on all the channels that I'm going to mix through, then I got everything going through buses, and then I got everything going to my master bus, which is my main mix master right here. And that's going to return out of the console from the main mix out back into my interface to capture what I'm mixing on the console. So all the channels that are being mixed out of the console will now come through buses or the main mix. So now what I recorded in the DAW will come through the channels for me to mix, and I can now send everything through the buses or the master the main bus. I can insert compressor on the master bus. And now I'm ready to record on the master bus. And then got a compressor, EQs or whatever on the master bus. And that's going to send back out of the console into the input to capture a 2-track. A lot of times what they do is the master output would record to a two track, or maybe a 1/2 inch reel-to-reel. That would be the master, the master recording to a, that's why they would have 2 reel-to-reels. One is a 24 track for recording. Another is maybe a 1/2 inch reel-to-reel for the master. So the master mix is done on the 2 inch, or the 1/2 inch coming from the master out here onto that. But in this case, we have to record back into the DAW. So your master output, which I have the cables here, you can barely see it through the light, but those 2 outputs for the main mix out is coming back into the DAW here for the purpose of recording. Now, some people might be wondering, well, how are you recording? Once again, if I got all my instruments, for example, the keyboards, as an example, you'll see here the keyboards, when I'm in record mode, if I play the keyboards here and I turn the channel on, all my channel, let's pretend there's something on this, even though I'm just gonna play the keyboard. Right? Let's say I have something on all the channels. Drums, keyboards, bass, guitar, vocals, everyone is recording live. That's why they call it a live room. Everyone's recording live in the live room, recording into the console, which is going to the tape machine. I can record, and that is coming out of the console through my main master. So if you look here, if I play the keyboards, now look at the input of my interface. When I turn the main mix down, I can still hear everything in the live room because I got the volume in the control room up and so forth. I had a volume up. So I can still hear what's being played in the live room, is just not going to the tape machine until I feed it to the tape machine. Once I feed it to the tape machine, which now in this case, your audio interface is your tape machine. Now my audio interface is receiving signal coming from the console. So any channel, all channels will reroute to the main mixer, which is your master bus. Okay. Once it comes out of the master bus, I can re-listen to I can get everything set up in the record mode. Get everything that I'm going to get everything set. Compressors, everything's patched in through the patch bay. Everything's plugged in. Now I can send it to the master, which is going to go to the recording machine. After I've recorded everything, now I can turn the console from a recording console into a mixing console, use all the channels again. I got all my channels set. I got all the compressors, inserts, because the inserts and EQ works in both mode. I can now mix, set my EQs. I can now mix on the console, set my EQs and all that, route everything through buses and the master bus, and everything would, in the old system, you would bus out to a tape machine or direct out to a tape machine, or in this case, you're just going to the interface. You're not going to a tape machine. You're going to an interface. Same concept. I can take all my outputs from the bus, run into inputs if I was running. But since this particular interface only records, it only records 6 inputs because I'm only recording 1 or 2 things at a time. If I was going to record a band and I was going to record 24 tracks, I would have an interface with at least 24 inputs on it. And I would also have an interface with 24 outputs. This is the reason why I have an envelope upstairs because it has 24 inputs and 24 outputs for that very reason. Just in case I want to record a band or I want to mix out 24 tracks or 32 tracks or whatever the case need to be. This is why your interface has so many outputs to come through your console. And the great thing about it, you can record zero latency because you're going through the console. You're not going through the interface where you're trying to set up the buffer and all that and the CPU processing and make sure your DAW's set up properly and try to get the most zero latency as possible. That the console it has zero latency. It's everything live. So the minute you hear it, and in the old days, the minute it came out of the console and you hit play and record on the tape machine, it was instant. That's not always the case in DAWs and how fast it can, especially when you start doing plugins and everything else. So to wrap it up, this is what Inline console. So the same concept was that in a split console, half the channels were they had preamps and all that on. They had preamps and things like that on the recording side of the console for the purpose of recording, in case you need to use preamps on the console. If you didn't want to use the preamps on the console, then you could use external preamps like this Focusrite. You can use external preamps, but you still want to record through some preamp, especially when it came to microphones. Then in mixing mode, that's why these particular, for example, these plugs, instead of coming through the channel inserts here, they're not going to the preamp. So the preamp, for example, is totally ineffective. These gain knobs are totally ineffective in monitoring mode or mixing mode. They don't work because I'm not going through the preamp. Even though I can still use the faders here. For example, if I pull up, let me pull up Reaper as an example. So, and you'll see what I'm talking about because I've already recorded in the DAW. Okay. I've already recorded in the DAW. So, with that being said, the outputs, all my outputs, so once if it loads up before, because I got a new controller, this Arterial Key Lab, which I'm gonna talk about in a different video. I just came in, and so it's got new plugins and all that. So it's scanning the new plugins. But anyhow, to make a long story short, so with that being said, all the outputs from what it was recorded in the DAW is coming out of the interface. So now it's in monitor mode or mixing mode. So now I can mix, and I'm ready to mix, put my inserts, effects, reverbs, all that stuff that I want to put on, all the stuff that I want to put on the, I'm going to mix. And then once I'm going to send it, I can send it to bus channels. Like this, for example, these are all going to bus channels. And then from my bus channels going to my master bus, my main mix, my master bus. And that's being returned back into the interface so I can print what I just recorded on the, or what I just mixed on the console. I can print from the master output. So a lot of people think this is the main master. And it's really not. It's really your main mix. That's why they say main mix or master bus. The main mix is finally everything, the glue, everything mixed together is the main mix volume. So your volume levels for your studio is really up here. That's why if you ever see, when you watch someone on a console, they're always reaching a little bit up on the console. There's always a knob. That's usually the control room. You know, that's usually the control room. That's all right. I'll fix that. So I'll fix that later too. Oh, because I got to do interface. But anyhow, so now, So now what would happen is once I get everything in the DAW, you can see everything's all in the DAW. I got everything going in the DAW. Everything's coming out of the console with the outputs of the consoles going through the channels. I can go ahead and start mixing on the console. Once I get done, I get everything through my buses, set my EQ, set my compressors on my bus channels and all that. And this is my master that's going to come out of the console back so I can print back a 2-track back into the DAW to print a 2-track final, what I've mixed. And that's basically the basis of a... That's the basis of a inline console. Is designed for you to record on, and then once you get done, you switch the mode to start mixing on. Versus a split. Split, you know, you would half the channels would be record, the other half would be to mix, and that's the difference. So that I hope this helped people out. You'll see once you get the concept of this kind of console, which is a recording console, you will understand the big consoles like APIs, Neve, SSLs, Tridents, Helios, Audience, all these big consoles that are recording consoles, and why they're set like that, especially when they're inline consoles where you can run through mic channels and run through or line channels, and why they have direct outs and bus outs, and how you can bus out or record out, and you have a master, and that's why you have control volumes. Once again, you got a control volume for your monitors. You got a second small faders, like this one has small faders. They're just not sliding faders like this. They're just knobs. That's for monitoring. That's why it's a mix B. Mix B. You can mix and listen to. You can monitor as you're recording through the mix B and so forth. The small fader, that's why it has a pan and EQ and all that. So you have a second set of volume levels. That's like you would see on an actual SSL, or that's why this is a recording console. Other than that, that's going to do it for this video. I hope that helped people out. So that's going to do it for this video, and we'll see you in the next one.